Hi, good evening. Welcome once again to the Gildarie Freddie Show right here on Facebook. We coming to you on the Guyanese Critic page. You could also get us on YouTube. We want to welcome you once again. It's cricket time. Cricket has started. CPL, it's all in the air. But we're getting ready for some serious business in Guyana right now. Before I hand you over to my co-host Freddie Kissoon, I want to say before we do that, I want to just reiterate and remind you, please be very careful on the roadways. It is getting really crazy out there. We have somebody who's going to probably tell you a little bit of road too, because he's in charge of that, at least some parts of it. But I'm going to hand you straight over to Freddie Kissoon because we have some heavy questions for two gentlemen here who are experts in their own field and experts because they have qualifications in that regard. But let me don't talk about qualifications. Let me talk about these gentlemen, and Freddie is going to talk about that. Freddie.
Good evening. Our two guests this evening are Minister within the Ministry of Public Works, Honorable Deodat Indar. Mr. Indar is a former executive of the Private Sector Commission, spent a number of years in that body, and now he's transitioned to government and politics. And then to my immediate left is financial analyst Joel Bhagwandin. He has his own company that offers financial intelligence and financial advice to corporate Guyana and beyond. Mr. Bhagwandin is going to analyze for you this evening the statistical outlay of present and past government. Minister Indar is going to talk about what his present status is. One of the ministers of public works. So we're going to ask him what's going on in public infrastructure. We're going to ask him how the pavement, the roads are coming on. But he's a politician. He campaigned during the 2020 election, so he has to answer questions about the cost of living. I'm going to start with Mr. Bhagwandin because he has a revelation to make, an academic revelation to make, that I found interesting in the newspaper and I used it in one of my columns. I think to date, Mr. Bhagwandin has done competent analysis of the financial performance of the APNU AFC government. Now, it's easy to listen or read when a former minister of the APNU AFC government tells you about this achievement and that achievement. But it's when you get down to examining the data, examining the statistics, that shows where there were no performance, there were no achievements at all. Joel Bhagwandin has done a demolition job on former Minister of Finance Winston Felix and one of the leaders, Winston Jordan. What did I say?
Tell Felix.
Felix, I'm getting old. Or maybe that's I tell you why I said that. I'm afraid of Winston Jordan. Mr. Jordan has targeted me over the years for libel. I don't want any libel. So maybe I shut him out of my mind. And I will ask you, Mr. Bhagwandin, as you show the performance of the APNU AFC government, please be careful what you say about Mr. Jordan. He has this penchant for wanting to sue. With that, I'll hand you over to Joel Bhagwandin. Mr. Bhagwandin, I saw some devastating statistics that shows that when the APNU AFC left in 2020, the government's financial standing, government's debt, government's reserve was worse than what it is in 2015.
Yeah, good evening, viewers. Good evening to Honorable Minister Gildarie. Thank you for having me here. We've shared similar platform in the past. I'm here the first time with you, Mr. Kissoon. Before I answer your question, first let me just offer some light humor. Thank you for the humble introduction, kind introduction. The humor is this. I grew up going to school reading your columns. I grew up reading Freddie Kissoon, Clive Thomas, Raw Lucas, Christopher Ram. And today it's an honor and a privilege to sit here next to you because I'll tell you a secret. When I was going to school and when I want to learn new words, fancy words, I read his column and I have my dictionary.
You know, people who sit and watching this program have the dictionary though. All right, go ahead.
So he called me today to remind me to make sure I have my stats. But I wasn't worried about his stats because I know the stats. I was more thinking I had to come with a dictionary.
When he asks you a question, when you going to tell him? All right, go ahead.
Anyway, so now to your question. So you have nicely quoted excerpts of a series of pieces I did, which was, as you rightly mentioned, in response to the former Minister Winston Jordan. Now, I don't attack personalities. I don't get personal. I deal with the issues and I deal with the policy. I do a lot of policy analysis, impact analysis, right? So let's put into context for the viewers. What are some of these things former minister emerged and what he said? So he emerged on different platform and presented the view that his performance, the performance of the economy during his tenure, was superior to the performance of the current administration in 2 years versus as well as the period pre-2015. But let's look at the stats. When we speak of economic growth, we have to dissect the number to understand what it means. The growth by itself doesn't really mean anything unless you understand whether this growth is driven by one component in the economy or whether this growth is driven by broad-based growth, inclusive growth, all these sectors. So the summary of the analysis I did, Freddie, is when you look cumulatively, right? Let's start with the non-oil economy, the non-oil sectors, right? For the period 2015 to 2018, cumulatively, with the exception of oil and gas, with the exception of gold carried this economy for a long time, and compare that cumulatively with the period pre-2015, the same 4 year. Those sectors, except gold and the oil economy, shrunk by $182 billion. That's 840 million US. That's close to 1 billion US.
And this is pre-pandemic you're talking about.
This is pre-pandemic,
Okay.
right? So that's on the economic sector's performance. Now, when you look at our reserves, right, what did he inherit when he went into office? Now, mind you, he went on a program and he was asked the question. He was finance minister for 5 years. He was asked the question, what is our international reserve? He don't know. And he presided over this. But I'll tell you, in 2020, the foreign exchange reserve in the Bank of Guyana was 595 million US. In 2020, that reserve was 548 million US. But hear this. This is a little bit technical. Let me break it down. That 595 million US in 2014 represented 5 months worth of import cover. Now that means in order for there to be stability of the domestic currency, stability of the economy, stability of the exchange rate, you have to have a minimum benchmark of foreign reserve. Because the foreign exchange market, import you have to get foreign exchange at the bank, exports foreign exchange coming in. So there has to be stability. You have to maintain a certain level of reserve. Now, there is a universal standard. There is a benchmark of a minimum of 3 months import cover. So that reserve in 2020 represented 5 months. So that is above the minimum. So that is strong, right? In 2020, that reserve represented 2.5 months import cover, below the benchmark. So which one is weaker? You don't have to be an economist to know which one is weaker and which one is stronger. What is the reserve used to do primarily? To pay for imports of fuel. Our fuel import bill before um, before this period of high prices, when you, and pre-pandemic was about 500 million US and change, right? So so that is what that reserve is, and throughout the year you have transactions. Now, what happened to another thing, the gold reserve, right? Historically, we never used to have gold reserve as part gold as part of the reserve component. So I think was around 20.
25 billion.
Yeah. No, when we started to include.
Yeah. So it was 25 billion.
25. No, I know,
When they
25 billion in 2014.
Yeah, when they took office.
Mhm.
And when they left office, it was less than 1 million.
No, I want to know which year. I think it was 2011 or somewhere, or 2005 when we started to include gold. We never had it before, but we used to include gold, and we started to build up that gold reserve. So by the time we started to build it up, when this government left office, it was 25 billion Guyana dollars. When they left office, Mr. Jordan left office, it was zero. Now, if you speak to the Bank of Guyana governor, he would tell you that the gold was sold because of the price of gold at the time. But here, what is the true reason, which he won't tell you? But this is my inference from it. If your foreign exchange is depleted because your exports from the other sectors have been depleting, right? You need to raise
They're
foreign
not performing.
exchange.
The sectors are not performing.
You need to raise foreign exchange to pay for imports. So that is why you had to sell the gold to raise the FX to pay for imports. Then, historically, and if you go to you look at the stats, you'll see the trend. If you look at the trend, so the commercial banks do transactions with the central bank. They buy and sell foreign currency to the Bank of Guyana. So historically, the Bank of Guyana usually has a net sale position with the commercial banks. During that period, the central bank had a net purchase position. So when they were selling to the commercial banks, they're not buying. Why? Because we have lost $182 billion in foreign exchange. That is not a good sign.
$182 billion.
Cumulatively, for the compared to the corresponding period, right? So that is one aspect of the weak performance. Then thirdly, now we talk about reserve. Thirdly, let's talk about fiscal management now, debt management. So, in what did Mr. Jordan inherit as finance minister? Now, for simplicity, he inherited literally $100 billion liquid cash in the bank. In the Bank of Guyana, the Bank of Guyana has these government deposit accounts. There was $100 billion, Guyana dollars, right? When he took office, he left it with 100 billion deficit, overdraft. And that was illegal, if I'm to say, according to the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act. Because the
Mr.
fiscal...
Bhagwandin, you're talking about a man who likes to sue.
No,
No,
he's
no.
saying what the position is. He's not saying that.
I'm not saying I'm not saying this is under his tenure.
Okay.
The fiscal, I'm telling you what the Fiscal Management and Accountability, and it's in the Auditor General reports. You guys do the Auditor General too, not me. I just quote in the report.
Okay.
The Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, when those accounts are in overdraft, at the end of the year, they're allowed to go into overdraft. But at the end of the fiscal year, you have to clear it, right? And here was the trick. Those balances were not included in the official stock of debt. So that means they were not reported in the official stock
That
of debt.
deficit of 100.
Correct, was
Right,
not included
right.
in the country's stock of debt.
That's legal?
No,
It
it's
is
basically
not.
saying it's
It
not
is not.
reflecting the true picture.
So when you look at the metric that measures that now, the stability metric, the debt stability metric, which is they call the GDP ratio, it looks good, but it still went up to over 50% under his tenure. Under the previous government, it was below. Now it's back again below 50%, right? That is because $100 billion of debt, you created in the central bank was not reported. So that is why when Finance Minister Dr. Ashley Singh went to the Parliament, went to the National Assembly to raise the debt ceiling, that was to regularize that now, to bring it in accordance with the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act. So they had to raise the ceiling, clear that deficit, and add it on to the stock of public debt, right? So in simple, so we talk about these sectors, what happened to these sectors. We talk about the reserve, how the reserve weakened relative to the corresponding period, and we talk about the debt sustainability level and $100 billion of debt that was not reported in the official report.
So I want to say something on this, if you'd allow me. So when I was at the Private Sector Commission and the president of the Chamber of Commerce, this matter came up. And at the same time, Joel came on at the Private Sector Commission as an economist, right? He came on for us as an economist. And I told him where to go and look for this thing. Let me tell you the problem with this whole scenario that he just said there. Because what happened, Freddie, is a very dangerous thing. So you are racking up an overdraft facility at the Bank of Guyana. And it went in year after year, it ballooned to close to $100 billion. Now, if you have a liability which you owe, with the bank have to get back from government. Government is pulling down this money, taking it from the bank. So they're selling the gold out. The gold is not used to prop up the US reserves that you need. It's disappearing. The money was disappearing and we didn't know where to look. But when we check, I tell them to check the deficit account, the deficit accounts. When we found it, so if on any business you have what you call an overdraft supposed to be something you got to settle quickly. So the bank, if the government owes the Bank of Guyana would have that as a receivable. Because the government got to pay back that. You understand me? Mm-hmm. What these guys did is take a receivable, which is a $100 billion of receivable, and hid it in a liability account. So what happened? You have an asset hidden in a liability account. The effect of that is that a liability account always carries a credit balance in any books. When you put an asset to it, it reduces the liability accounts. So what this effective did is contracted the asset base of the bank. So and that is what it was dangerous in doing. So you have these normal operating spending of the country for payment of bills collectively by private sector and government to buy fuel, to pay bills through the banks. Government would normally put in the US into the private bank circulation to honor those. They're selling out the gold rather than put the money to build up this US reserve. It's used to spend on whatever it is that government is spending it on. But what they're doing there is we call an off-balance sheet financing to say. The debt is not recorded in the official stock of debt within the government. So when you report your debt figures, your debt to GDP ratio, what you call your debt burden, when you're reporting it, that $100 billion is not forming part of that. Your debt to equity, or your debt to burden is measured by your debt over your GDP. The debt is your numerator. The GDP is the denominator. If the numerator is small, you'll have a very good-looking tax, we call debt burden, because you're suppressing the numerator. So they have 100 billion that is left out. So when the IMF made the wrongs in Guyana, we pointed it out to the IMF and said, if you look in the Bank of Guyana, you will find a figure down there hidden in liabilities, an asset account, which is an amount of money that is due to the government due to the bank from the central government. It's hidden in there. You have to bring that on the books and recalculate your your debt burden.
Minister.
So that was the issue. Apart from all of the nonsense that he did with the sectors, you could talk fancy language, and I can talk about this in a very frank term. The nonsense that he did with the productive sectors, that we in the private sector were going and knocking on his door, protesting him, and a whole host of things we did just to make things right, when they were literally chopping down the productive sectors, literally chopping down, removing all the incentive and introducing taxes. The philosophy of their government was totally a tax and spend mentality. And if you check, and if you do, and Joel, you can do this, you have the time, do an analysis of their budgets from the time they start to the time they end. Their recurring expenditure was climbing at a faster rate than the capital expenditure. The capital expenditure was going in a different direction. We were reducing the capital expenditure. Now, capital expenditure is for schools, is for roads, is for hospitals, is for city fences, is for all of these things, and you're reducing the yearly spend. So capital expenditure generate what you call capital formation and social formation. If you don't spend money there, how is it you're going to develop a country? All you're doing is carrying up the recurring expenses. So you have to look at it, and when you peel off the layers and you go down, you'll see the level of nonsense that Mr. Jordan, who was short over the economy during that period. But I don't think it was him alone. It was a collective decision by all of them. A cabinet had to make that. So I don't pick him out. I don't pick him out and speak about Mr. Jordan like that. It was a collective.
But he was the finance minister. Mm-hmm. You can't expect the minister of education to know, for example, a lot of technical things that I just said here. Some ministers of the government would not be aware of. I mean, a man is a historian. He becomes the minister of education. He has to be guided by the financial expert like you guys. So even though it's a collective decision, he was the finance man that was going in these directions that were fatalistic.
Let me ask you a question. I disagree with you, Freddie. Forget the technical part of the financing. Is it right to tax education? No. Is it right to tax herbicide, pesticide, and fertilizer that grows food for all of us to eat? Is it right to tax farm equipment? Is it right to tax miners? That is not technical information. That is just common sense.
But if I may...
So I don't agree with you on that one. Sorry. I'm telling you flat out. I don't, because the tax shingles that people used to make houses, the tax, we had to run down there, me, the manufacturing guys, and went down there and we tell them you can't do that, you tax.
No, I agree. You can't tax, put VAT and tuition. I mean,
you remember all those things?
Right.
Electricity, you put in tax on electricity.
But I couldn't understand. He increased animal drawn vehicle license by 10,000. So what madness was that?
Let me tell you, you have no idea. Them men tax the Balamlacha man. The man who moving with a little thing on his shoulder. They tax the man who got a donkey cart and a horse cart. All them hucksters they tax. Every single thing was a tax. We had to remove them. The first budget that we put in 2020, we remove a whole set of them and cut down a whole set of them. The second budget we went by, we do the same thing. That is what it did. It's to bring back people to 2015 status quo where we didn't tax. Let me tell you, at the end of 2014, under the PPP government, 2015 the government changed. Your tax bill, your total tax intake in the country was about $135 billion. The total tax take. When they left in 2020, you know what was the tax take in 226 billion. That is a 6 to 7%. A 6 to 7% increase in taxes. That is putting both hands in people's pocket. You don't have to be a technical man to understand that, Freddie. That is common sense. So the collective or with the cumulative effects or the sum effects of all of them policies is that if more money came out, where taxes come from, partner? It come from you, it come from the sole trader, it come from the businessman employees. Taxes come from those places. So when government take plenty and they say, oh, we collect more taxes, it come from somewhere. It means it come from your pocket. It come from the businessman pocket.
But I guess
that is what it is.
I guess I know what you're saying. You're saying that, look, even though these things were technical, the collective cabinet had to see that Jordan was doing nonsense. Even if the guy doesn't know about finances, and I don't know about finances, I know they were wrong. When I went to the wharf in 2019, they told me my tires were for the car I import. The tires got A, B, C, D, and asking me to pay 10,000 for each tire. That was 40,000 because they said the tires have to be new. I concede that people like Clive Thomas, I mean, 2015 government has demolished the legacy of Clive Thomas. So I agree that this guy was a technical man, the finance man. But I would definitely support you if I sit down at the table here with a technical man and I don't know anything at all about what he's saying. But I hear him say that everybody got to buy new tires, which cost 25. I'm going to tell him he's talking nonsense. So in that sense, you're right. And we should not allow the cabinet, Granger, Greenwich, and all of them to escape the nonsense that Winston Jordan was putting in his budget.
Well, if he wasn't doing nonsense, I'll tell you why.
What he was doing?
The
He said
economic,
nonsense.
the political, well, technically it was, but what was driving, it's not that he doesn't know these things. Minister Jordan is a very qualified man in economics, right? But let me give you, I've never said this publicly, but I'm going to say it publicly for the first time on this show. You got to understand, I've implied it in my writings, but I'm going to say it explicitly. The political ideology, the political philosophy of a government guides their policy, right? So let's understand what was their philosophy. Their philosophy was this, and it is still their ideology. They believe that they were of the belief, and they are still of the belief, that the private sector is pro PPP and is of a certain group, and therefore they want to destroy the private sector and create a parallel private sector. Now I'll give you evidence to back up what I'm saying, right? So that was, they didn't care that increase in taxes, the man on the consumer is feeling it more, but they care that increasing taxes is hurting the businessman. But they didn't care it hurting the average person. So let me give you evidence of this philosophy. When I joined the Private Sector Commission, right, there was a concerted effort to create a parallel private sector with Trinidadians. There was one group that came here that was trying to create a Trinidad energy chamber. We stopped that. They underestimated the resilience and the dominance of the local private sector, right? That's one example. The then Prime Minister went to Trinidad and say, not like how our president said it. When our president go to Trinidad, when our president go to Trinidad, he's saying, okay, I'm making 5,000 acres of land accessible to Trinidad, or 20,000 acres of land. Versus, and you could go and check the record, when the then Prime Minister went to Trinidad, we're going to give you all lands and everything come. Unlimited. No limit, unlimited, right? Let me give you another evidence now. Policy making, using the budget process as an example, is made through consultations with stakeholders. The private sector is one of the most important and biggest stakeholder. The private sector, and I could tell you this authoritatively, using local content as an example. There were a series of rounds of consultation and written submissions under the previous government. There were 3 draft local content policy under the previous government. We made submissions after submissions, critique after critique their policy. None of our submission were reflected in their policies. Now, listen to this, which is so, it's an impasse. The last draft local content policy under them. You know what it said? It was about 50-something pages. The first 2 pages, which speaks to the objective of the policy. The preamble. It says that this policy at this point in time is promoting upstream sector. Now, what does upstream sector mean? upstream sector simply means you are disregarding legitimately the private sector altogether, because the private sector does not have the capacity, does not have the knowledge, does not have the technology, does not have the financial capital. One development alone in the upstream sector, which is what Exxon and its
Billions.
partners doing, one Liza phase one alone is $4 billion. Our GDP, pre-oil GDP was $4 billion. It means if you take all the money in the private sector,
don't have
we
it.
ain't got
Yeah,
enough money.
I heard
That
you
is what that means, and that is the case for every other budget consultation, every other engagement. Under the previous, there is a 1996 National Development Strategy. You know how a National Development Strategy was formed? It was crafted with the involvement of 200 plus Guyanese professionals and stakeholders and doctors and lawyers and accountants and businessmen. And you know who led it? The highest level, the president, right? And this culture continued under now Vice President Jagdeo when he was president, and current president. The highest level of government, ministers and presidential level, involved in these consultations. When private sector leaders at that time, Minister Indar was top leader in the private sector, you're engaging in meeting, stakeholder meeting. You know who we're dealing with? The junior level staff, and nothing is reflected. Now compare the 1996 strategy with 200 Guyanese, right? With the Green State Development Strategy. You know who wrote the Green State Development Strategy? The United Nations. This is how the United Nations operate. Countries like Guyana, which in their view of the world, countries like Guyana are third world countries, which is a derogatory thing in the first place. And so because they see, okay, we're a third world country, they have all over the world these MBA students, master's degree students, they hire them as interns. So they send these interns to these countries.
And then map out
So
that's so
you had-
well known. That's
so
so
you
well
had
known.
an intern who is not Guyanese from the United Nations came to put together what was called the Green State Development Strategy. You know what they did? I studied all the strategies in this country: 1996 Development Strategy, Green State, Low Carbon, everyone. You know, if you go and do an exercise now, the Green State Development Strategy is a cut and paste document, parts from the National Development Strategy, parts from the National Competitiveness Strategy under this government, parts from the Low Carbon Development Strategy. And it's a cut and paste document done by an intern and say, here, we present a brand new strategy.
They do that all the time, even when they present a political analysis
So-
of Guyana, they cut and paste.
So that is to present the evidence, Mr. Kissoon and Mr. Gildarie, that the philosophy of the government, they never intended to grow this private sector. Their intention was to destroy this private sector. Their intention was to create a parallel private sector. And I don't know how you're going to build a country like that.
Thank
And
you
that
very
is
much.
what informed those
Joel,
policies.
and what you've done there quite in a realistic manner, painted a picture of some of the missteps and a lot of the mistakes, how to alienate yourself and how to not govern. Minister, and I come straight into you because we want to keep this conversation going. A big thing that is hitting the Guyanese full in the face, and not only Guyanese, governments across the world, everybody is the cost of living. Fuel gone up, everything has gone up across
God,
the world.
I want-
Shipping is a big issue.
I want to hear what
Uh,
the minister has to say about that, because I need some
Government
money.
is using a lot of our monies, the oil monies, and the oppositions describe it as handouts. Are we going too fast? How are we dealing with cost of living and adapting ourselves? Because when we look at the projections and where Guyana is at, we're on top of the world right now. I want to hear from you, sir.
Well, first of all, if the opposition is to say we're using the oil money to give handouts, that's just wrong. So in the current budget, it's the first year we have actually started using the oil money, and it came in as budgetary support, about $126.1 billion in the revenue side of the budget, and that was a drawdown from the NRF, which is the Natural Resource Fund, into the budget as budgetary support. Before that, we had 2020 and 2021, where we were doing a whole host of things without even traveling that money. Without it, we were giving, we were helping out in support and relief, flood relief, COVID-19 relief. We brought back the children cash grant. We did change the customs procedure to use pre-pandemic freight levels to reduce the costs,
cost,
the
yes.
way called the assessment costs for the purposes of tax for any
Exports,
importer,
right, the
for
export
any
imports.
importer who are importing goods, so that the overall cost can go down. Remember, gentlemen, there are controllable costs and there are uncontrollable costs. There are some within your control and some you just can't do anything about. You have to fight around it. One of them is the costs on the commodity markets. If you look at the commodity markets on fuel, God knows. I mean, before the pandemic is around $69. June this year went to $122 per barrel. You explain to me, how is it the globe can sustain that? That energy cost drives everything, because you use 11, if you check the entire global transport system, ships, cars, whatever, everything used, most of it uses fossil. The ships that move around, that move 80% of the world goods, it moves using these heavy fuel, some of them using heavy fuel, some of them using diesel, whatnot. It's fossil they're using. So when prices go up, freight costs go up, and that fuel cost is just another layer on that. We had problems with ports being shut down. They can't find containers to load ships. All of these things. They had issues where now all of the Black Sea ports are blocked off because of the war in Ukraine with Russia. Stifling routes. All of that is impacting you. Now, back in the day, you used to pay about $3,300 to bring a 40 foot out to China, maybe Shanghai. Shanghai bringing it to LA, Shanghai to New York, Shanghai to Rotterdam, or the other way around. If you're moving backward, New York to Rotterdam, Rotterdam to Shanghai, these different routes, these major routes. What you had is a free-flowing system until this pandemic kicked in, and it disrupted the supply chain. Now containers were costing people in this country
20,000.
23,000 it
Right.
raised to. There one point when containers coming out of Singapore and Malaysia was 23,000 US. So it's the same goods in the container. You can't load more than a particular weight per container because there is a weight limit on the containers. Same goods you bring in, same stuff in, but the price gone up 7 times. How is it that an importer can absorb that cost? You got to pass it on. That is what you call imported inflation. And it's happening all over the world. If you look at the Eurozone, the entire Eurozone, you have Malta straight up to Estonia. Malta is about 6.1%. Estonia is 22% inflation. The entire Euro bloc is high in inflation. In the US, it's about 9.1, the highest in 40 years. So when you have countries that are producing goods, packaged goods, finished goods, and then you have to import it into your country, they are experience cost increases too. So when their costs go up, then you have a layer of freight costs going on. Then you got to traffic the distance, bring it here. What do you think when you go to the shelf? It goes up all the time. So just before you come in, Freddie, that is just fuel. If you look at wheat price has gone up, soya price has gone up. All of the food item, the base feedstock to make food, all of them gone up. Simply because to produce those things, you need fertilizer. If you check the categories of fertilizer, urea straight up, they gone up too. Not by 1%, 2%, or 10%, hundreds of percentage points increase. Hundreds of percentage points increase. Simply because fertilizer is made using natural gas. Natural gas is an associated gas when you're extracting crude. So when you got to produce fertilizer, you need natural gas. So when the prices go up, fertilizer price go up. All of the wheat, Ukraine exports about around that 30% of global wheat demand. It supplies that. And then you have a war there. What do you think happened to all of the wheat? Argentina have about 58% inflation. Argentina normally provide a lot of grains to the world too. They have problems down there. So when you have this inflation is bouncing and ravaging the world economy, and every producing country that produce items, you have to bring it into your country. You're bringing in the inflation into your country because we don't manufacture everything that we use. right? Even if it's a tub of butter. I made a case in Parliament with a tub of butter. A tub of butter have about 9 counts of freight inside. You have things to deal with the emulsifiers them, you have the packaging, you have the palm oil that goes in, you have all kind of things that you put into the butter to make it how it is. Each one of that come from a different place. So if you have 10 things that go into that butter to make it, it's 10 counts of freight into that one item. And then you now have to manufacture the guys, still have your in-country manufacturing costs to go through to. So when you do that and you put on a markup, then it goes to the shopman put on a markup, then you buy it. So you think about the layers of cost that are added on to a single product. And that is what we need to understand. That's why we have to explain to people. There are things you can control in Guyana, and there are things that is just something that is, for 40 years you have not seen it.
I want to bring you back. I want to stick with you because, unlike Mr. Bhagwandin, you're an official politician. You were elected to Parliament. You use a word that I'm not too sure the present generation, we have a very young population, that APNU even tax the Badam Lacha man. I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure our generation. I know it was Badam Lacha. I don't know if these younger folks knows it. You said they tax even the Badam Lacha man. So they tax the donkey cart driver. They tax people, they ban tires, used tires. No car could come in unless it was 8 years old. These things affected even their own supporters. And now we have this cry about emerging apartheid. You tax donkey cart men. A whole set of them are African youths living in Sophia. I know about that. I live in Turkine. I see them passing the way. Back when every Sunday they have races. You tax Georgetown taxi drivers are mostly African Guyanese. And you banning used tires. And then in the same breath, you lost power and you're hearing about an emerging apartheid system. I met a businessman, an African Guyanese businessman, one of the most prominent in Guyana. And he said to me in the National Park this morning, you know, Freddie, they behave as if the 5 years don't exist. So tell us about the Badam Lacha man in relation to apartheid.
But you're forgetting the sugar industry too, with the workers.
No, talking about apartheid.
So here is the story. These guys, when they were in government, they didn't care about any race of Guyanese, not even their own supporters. Their own supporters used to tell us, I know some of them, that they couldn't even meet some of their ministers. But when they were campaigning, you would have had to call.
I know about that, minister.
And when they're ready, the policies that they put in wasn't for the taxi driver in Georgetown alone, Freddie. Imagine, you talk about Sophia, check the roads in Sophia. You talk about Georgetown, check the roads in Georgetown. Every road in this country was in a dilapidated state because they simply didn't put the money into it. Now, you've got bad roads, and yet you're banning the tires. You tell me how people are going to live. Think about it. Think about the nonsensical nature of a policy like that. How can you fix the road? Then you'll tell a man, okay, you buy a new tire or something like that. Fix the road at least so that the man tying and damage quick. But when you got the road all over, they got some big hole. You got some road. I'm public works minister. I go to some places. When we started government, they hold them so big in the road, you think alligator living in those holes. That is how bad it was. And we went and we fixed them one by one, and we still fixing. Because when you fix one, the next neighbor village see you fixing the one, you gotta go fix the other one. That is what's happening now. Everywhere, everybody want, and they may want it fixed tomorrow or the next day. They want it fixed now or yesterday. So this apartheid thing what they're talking about, let me tell you my suspicion. After the fiasco of rigging and trying to steal our entire country in broad daylight
for 5 months,
in front of every single person, their own people, forget the hardliners in their support base that don't care what they do, will still support it. Forget those. The ones them that are the youths growing, who are not too loyal to it, they're loyal to their own needs and they're loyal to their own development and so on, want to see good. The people them are the early adopters that will jump party lines, or the late adopters will jump party lines. Their own supporters were fleeing from them because they didn't want to associate themselves with rigging. Because imagine you have to sit in your house as a supporter of APNU and explaining to your child who's coming up that what they're doing down there is the right thing to do. Imagine you got to put that in your child here. People in this country are smart. They're not sheepish. They rejected them and they start to move away from them. So you know what they decide to do? They raise scared. Frighten people. Now they go with this apartheid bullshit. Excuse my language. Those things don't belong in this country. It don't belong in this country. The entire public sector is mostly employed by supporters of, you have, right now we are doing everything under one Guyana. Everybody gets work. Everybody gets a job. Everybody is involved. Everybody are part of the decision-making process. Everybody we are bringing involved. Once you're willing, you come on board. Look where we are. Every community we are in. We are working with them. We're sitting. Once you're willing, we will work with you. And we are not waiting for you to come to us. We are going to you. We put our lives at stake, Freddie. Ministers of this government, when they had COVID, I end up getting COVID. In fact, most of the cabinet end up getting COVID. Going out there during the COVID, we put our lives at stake. Because some of us have underlying conditions that can easily put you to your grave. And we went out there to meet with everybody, not one set of people, everybody. Communities that support the APNUFC, communities that support the PPP. But every community we go into. So this thing about apartheid, I just think, for me, is that when the well is dry, you scratch, you bite your bark, you dig at anything to get attention.
It's a narrative. There's no evidence, right? I could do a policy analysis and show you evidence of apartheid element, but I just give you evidence in my previous articulation. That is apartheid. When you want to displace an entire private sector, you're displacing an entire country like that and affecting so many other people. The case of the sugar estate. And talking of Gaisuku, that's a classic example. And I want to talk about it in the context of one of your columns, where you quoted the former Minister Jordan, where somewhere he went, so I'm going to rely on your quoting him correctly, where he said he did a comparison of 1985 to 1992. The public servants reduced, and then from 1992 to I think 1999, right? And he quoted some figures, but I don't know if you did not quote him correctly or you missed out thing.
I read this thing. I did. I know the man. He likes to sue, so I quote him correctly.
He did not give the context, and context is important to the viewers and Freddie and Gildarie. What is the context? In 1985, during that period under Hoyt that he's referring to, before Hoyt took over, we were a centrally command state under LFS border.
Status economy, right?
More than 80% of the productive arm of the economy was controlled by the state. And you know our history, our political history well. The result, long story short, the result was a bankrupt economy. When a country becomes bankrupt, it means the people are bankrupt. It means 100% of the population are in poverty. Right? 100% of our population was in poverty. That's the struggle where we came from. As a result of their policies, Hoyt had absolutely no choice. He had no choice. He had to go to the International Monetary Fund, because the International Monetary Fund is an international financial institution set up post World War I and II for this particular purpose, to help countries that are in crises, to bail them out. That is their main function and mandate. And so he had to go there, and when they come, austerity measures, economic reform program, privatize the economy, sell out all the state-owned enterprise, sell out Guyana stores and so on, and to help restructure the debt, help us. And then Vice President at the time helped in a huge way by securing debt forgiveness. Otherwise, this country could not have been moved from bankruptcy to a $4 billion economy, and from $200 per capita income to 5,000 without oil, with all those struggles. So the context is important. Those period, we were in a bankrupt state, and so you had to. The country got money, so you had to restructure the public service. And 1992 to 1999. If you plot a graph, and I have, this is why I can tell you, we had so many periods of instability, politically motivated violence and crime and instability and riots and protest. And then there was one period we had a natural disaster, 2000 to 2005 flood, that affected the development of the country. So during those periods, you had political instability and still people were fleeing the country. So naturally, as a result of the restructuring of the economy, it means those people are going to go and look. New job now opening up in the private sector with the birth of the private sector. People still fleeing to other shores, right? And that is what happened. What is the context? When he inherited Gaisuku, the state, they had $100 billion liquid cash in the bank. They had 5 months worth of import cover in foreign reserve. They had all the sectors were doing well. All they had to do was to build on that. And then Gaisuku, they paid Dr. Clive Thomas $50 million, that commission that was set up, $50 million it cost taxpayers. And Dr. Clive Thomas never recommended the closure of any estate. In fact, what he recommended they did not do. He said in his recommendation, long list of recommendation, before any decision is made, we have to do an economic and social impact study. And then he made recommendation for diversification. And then he said we need to do an option analysis of each one of these to see the feasibility. He never recommended the closure of any estate. And so they disregarded the work of Dr. Clive Thomas, paid $50 million for it. The Minister of Agriculture did something called a white paper, which is another cut and paste document, and go to the parliament and say we have to close the estate.
Yes. So one of the things you missed there is that in the report, the commission of inquiry that they had into Gaisuku, right? The report that they had, the debt figure that they quoted that Gaisuku had was incorrect. They call it liabilities. Now, the definition of a liability, they had in that figure $32.3 billion of what we call defined benefit obligation. So the only way that will become realizable is if you fire out everybody, you got to pay out everybody.
So they inflated the debt.
They inflated the amount of liability that Gaisuku had, making it a way that this company is strapped with all of this debt. When I did the analysis of it, because at the same time I was president of the Chamber of Commerce, and this thing was going on, so I got the financial statements and I did the analysis on it. And then I read the report and I saw that he has it as a liability. Now they have liability that, like deferred tax. All of that was in it. Can you go pay a man deferred tax? Can you go cut a check to GRA and say, I'm paying you deferred tax? No. Deferred tax is an accounting standard that puts into your financial statement tax when people start to manipulate their depreciation policy. So they put the tax there to smooth out your profits to make sure that you don't, depreciate this phone, which is an asset over 20 years. So you're dropping bits and pieces of a capital cost over a long period. What deferred tax does is bring back the taxation policy and the depreciation policy of the company into one. So you don't pay deferred tax. It's an accounting entry. And the charges going year by year. It drops into the P&L year by year. It's a very complex standard, but it is not something that you have to go pay. They included that as liabilities. That if you have to go pay this money, some $80 billion. And literally misled conniving way. Misled people.
Here I want
and
to ask,
created the case to send home those workers.
Here I want to ask the two of you, with this knowledge of the financial madness or insanity 2015, 2020, under Dr. under President Burnham, President Hoyt, President Jagan, President Janet Jagan, Barbara Jack Dew, there was this central presidential figure that looked into things. And I know from Burnham to Jack Dew, including all who's president, they had a hands-on approach to things. Who was, when all of this insanities were going on, where was Granger?
What are you looking at me for?
I don't know why you're looking at me. We should ask him when you get a chance, though, Freddie. Find out where was he. Because I'll tell you, whilst this thing was happening to Guyana, what I was hoping that my young Padawan here would have explained at a 30,000 feet view of what was happening. You see, what was happening to the economy was a rupture, seismic rupture to the economy. So when you shut Gaisuku down, you fire out thousands of people, close to about 30,000 people lost their job. The direct employees and the indirect one who depended on the industry.
It is set to be 42,000.
Then you went out into the Amerindian community and fire out 1,972 CSO workers, the Amerindian community. Then you went into the forestry sector and started tax the sector. Start breaking up.
Badam Lacha, man.
Start breaking up concession holders' concession who employed a lot of hinterland and riverine community folks. Then they went on to the tax rampage and started taxing the private sector, taxing the households, moving things that you never used to pay. If I used to buy, if I had a zero-rated item, it means that everything I spent to produce this item, the tax, the VAT associated with it is recovered from GRA. They move it from zero-rated and put it to the standard rated. Means you have to now charge a consumer the money. So that will recover it back from the government through the GRA. You're recovering it back from the consumer, the man on the street, the housewife who went to the shop. So these seismic ruptures to the economy is very difficult now to put back together. People think it's an easy job. Go to Wales. I ask you, go to Wales. Go check the Wales estate. They even sell out the scrap iron, Freddie. It's mangle iron, and the mangle iron end up selling out to people God knows who it gone to. You can't build it back. You can't build it back. When you live motors down, it's just like you, if you lie down in your bed for 10 days, 15 days, when you get up, all your bones start to hurt because you haven't moved. Same thing with machinery, pumps, and so. You left them down, you're going to get problems to start them up back. You left fields unattended, weeds going to grow inside. So when, there's unattended assets, and that is what they did. At a 30,000 feet view, that is what it did to the country. Me and you, we are the corner in a little house and we go into the shop, you feel it when you go. If you used to carry home so much of goods, you got to pay more for the same so much of goods.
We run out of time.
No, we got a couple minutes more.
We only got
no work.
We only got about 3 minutes more.
Could we?
We got to close up.
Yeah, we got about 3 minutes more. So we have to do this again, or we could ask them to wrap up. No.
Yes. Okay. All right. In closing, Minister, there's a big thing that's happening, and I'd give you a closing statement to Joe as well. And shortage of contractors. I know that you guys have billions of dollars more to spend. How are you dealing with that?
Okay. So what happened is that, as you know, the budget this year is 553, plus we just had a supplemental, a huge supplemental, right? Of around 40 plus billion. So it is the biggest budget in the history of the country. And the spending and the productive capacity to execute that is something that we're really trying to manage. Let's say, for example, crusher run, sand, loom, cement, steel. All those things are part of the building of the country. You have to get it to build. So although you have the money to spend, the speed on which the productive capacity of quarries to give you that is lacking. The sand pit guys, them get in trouble. Or when you got more demand than the supply, price start to go up. The contractors, because we're doing so much of projects, and not just public works alone, you have housing, you have local government, you have all of the big ministries, you have agriculture doing different things, you have the private sector. I'm just talking about government. You have the private sector. Everywhere you go, something is building. Some hotel is going up, some warehouse is going up, some shore base is building. Everything require base, we call artworks. Sand, loom, stone. So you have all of this happening, and you got a layer of contractors that used to operate in the sector. So all of these things now end up flooding the table. So if you want to make a man inefficient, you flood his plate.
There's one of the biggest problems.
If you want to make a man inefficient, you flood his plate. So what happened? We can't do that. If you have 5 contracts and you're struggling, we give you a 6, we're literally telling you to fail. So what we are doing now, we have made it a concerted effort, and this is led by the president himself, that every single person, we are trying to make sure that we build new facilities, capabilities in the various parts at a community level. I'll give you Borbis, for example. In Borbis, we're building roads. It's built by Borbicians. So new people are coming in, they're learning. So if you build a asphaltic concrete, which is the bituminous surface, if you build that, you need a paver, you need an excavator, you need a roller, you need things, right, to get that done. But if you build a cross street that is 9 feet wide, maybe a couple 100 feet long, you can do that with concrete. You don't need those equipment. You need a ransom, or you need the man the concrete man, and you get your guys them, or you survey the place, and you put the base works, and you get people building capacity in the communities. And that is what we're doing. So what we're doing is building up contractors throughout the country at the community level. Everywhere we go, we're trying to get the people from the community to be part of the building of the country.
Okay.
And that is the one.
Joel, you want to sum up? You got to go now.
Well, I don't know how we're gonna sum this up, but I wanna sum it up by talking about the cost of living.
I need some money in the cost of living.
Minister Indar spoke of the macro view. The quantitatively, if you do an impact assessment of the measures that the government have implemented, from 30% to 0% removal excise tax on fuel, the raising of the threshold, no raise in electricity bill and water bill, that means that is subsidized because they got to incur high fuel costs, right? And cash grants and all the other things. Quantitatively, right? And you got to look at it from when these reversal was done in 2020, 2021. They say there is a view that we're not we should use the oil money to inject in cost of living. Well, the sum total of those measures, right, represented 178% of the 2021 balance in the Natural Resource Fund, meaning that's the sum total of $227 billion as of 2021. So technically, we've spent more than the oil money we have. That is the value of the measures when you do the impact analysis. To sum this up, I think this was a thorough conversation. We need to do this again to continue some other things. Where the country is heading, we have a bright future. We have to be able to pay attention, see what is happening, and ask ourselves, what do we need to do to be a part of this, and so that we could benefit from what is happening and all the opportunities that are opening up.
2 things I'd like to say before we close. I like the Badam Lacha example. I wish we had the telephone on to find out from these young people if they know what is Badam Lacha. I doubt a majority of young people. The other thing I want to show our viewers is Joel talk about how gold saved this country. And he's a good example of how gold saved the country. Look at his wedding band and my wedding band.
It's just like you're not cleaning yours. What are you doing that for?
This my wedding band must be worth about 100 times more than mine. The goal is here for you, Joel. That was nice. We got to do this again, right?
Yeah.
So,
ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we have to bring it to an end. We've run out of time, and it's cricket time. But I must tell you, I don't normally put my belly out, as I say, but I could say without any doubt that Minister Indar is one of the most approachable ministers. I find him one of the most hard-working ministers also, and I would say that quite with some authority as well. Joel has quite impressed me. I met him on Radio Kaito Radio there, and I've watched him and I've watched his writings and so on. He's not afraid to take on and to say it as it is. As usual, as we close, and we're going to be back with you on Friday. Same place, same time, regardless of cricket or not. We have our work to do. We have a country to build, and we have people to talk about it. 2 bright individuals here, and of course Freddie, as usual, a little out of context, but that's okay. He's my friend. Have a pleasant rest of the night, and thank you, gentlemen.
your jokes are stale.